might turn out to be useful later. And applied research is something that actually has a use in real life. So I want you to answer that question. Next, I want you to look for what was he comparing cell phone use to? Find at least one other type of distraction that he was comparing it to. And then finally, if you were interested in knowing the impact of cell phone usage on driving safety, how could you answer that question? And I want you to give an answer that would fit the category of systematic empiricism, which means, remember, empiricism is observation. And we're not just observing like one person or our own experience, but we're observing enough people that we could generalize the information to a larger population. So those are the questions I'd like you to answer, and look for answers as we watch the video. And then I'll have you go over these in a group in a few minutes with your partner, I should say. So let's watch this one more time and look for answers to those questions. And if you did your reading, you already know how he tested his hypothesis, so that should be easy for you. So let's go ahead. And I think we're actually going to do the first few questions as a group, and then we'll do that last one with you and your partner.
My name is David Strayer, and I'm a
I'm going to play the other version because this one...
psychologist. I study cognitive neuroscience. That's the study of thinking, memory, perception, decision-making, and trying to understand how the brain is responsible for those behaviors. It's science in action. When I started working, I worked in telecommunications, just when cell phones were starting to become popular. And at that time, it was pretty clear that you could become sufficiently distracted by the use of cell phone technology when you're trying to drive a car. So I've been studying driver distraction, looking at what we understand about attention and how the brain can multitask, how that relates to our everyday behaviors driving an automobile. You can go ahead and start the car now. Why I love this job is I can basically ask any question I want about what makes us tick and how we behave, and use research methods and the scientific method to be able to answer those questions. That means observing, making hypotheses, designing experiments and testing them. A lot of times people think if your eyes are on the road and your hands are on the wheel, you'll be fine. But if you use a cell phone, is that something that actually harms driving behavior? And how does it differ from other things like listening to a radio or talking to a passenger? We're interested in things like handheld and hands-free cell phones. How do those differ? We found that if you talk on a cell phone, you're 4 times more likely to be involved in a crash. That's the same crash risk as if you were driving at a 0.08 blood alcohol level if you're drunk. Worse is if you're texting. You're 8 times more likely to be involved in a crash. That's substantially worse than the drunk driver. We're looking now at some of the voice-based technologies.
Hello, Siri. Read appointments.
What we, I think, have learned is that some of these voice-based technologies are putting demands on the brain to try and multitask in ways that exceed the capacity to be able to do that activity and drive safely. We know that the research that's come out of my laboratory has been influential in changing regulatory policies and laws. At this point, 41 states in the United States now have laws that make it against the law to text while driving. There's a number of multinational, multi-billion-dollar companies that have taken the research that we've collected and have used that as a basis for policies for not using their cell phones while driving. They substantially reduced the total number of crashes for their employees, and there was no loss in productivity. At the end of the day, we would hope that you're going to see fewer fatalities on the roadway because people are not distracted. That's taking psychology and translating it directly into action. That's science in action.
Okay, so let's go back to these first questions and get the answers. I don't quite know where this came from, but let me get the answers to those questions. I think it's gone, or we might have another video coming up here. Let me just make sure it's gone. Okay, so what would you say his research?
So this is a story about your brain.
Okay,
It's really
hang
going to
on.
be two
I have
stories
to
today.
find it.
The first is about what happens to your brain when you try to do two things at the same time, both of which seem simple.
And we'll close the window just to be on the safe side. Okay, I'm just going to go around and ask you. His research topic, how would you state that? I'm going to go to Janie. What would you say is his research topic? Like just a word or two. Just a word or two.
His research topic is the distraction of cell phones while driving.
Okay, cell phone usage. We might even just say, yeah, cell phone usage while driving. Let's put that. Very good. And now I'd like to ask Tylea, can you put this in a form of a question, a research question? What was he trying to answer? Tylea, do you have an answer to that one?
I'm trying to think of one right now. Maybe how does the use of cell phones impact driver reaction times
I think
or
that's
the
an
overall driving
excellent,
performance?
I think that's an excellent response to that question, Tylea. So I'm glad you stated it that way. Boy, oh boy, do I have a lot of windows getting in my way here. See if I can get rid of all that stuff. And get the video. See how we just took that topic and then we turned it into a question? Okay, is this basic or applied research, Malia?
Applied research,
Why do you say that? You're correct.
because he's like asking a question and he's actually doing the research, like actually figuring out based off of the different experiments that he did with the people having the cell phones in their hands
Okay.
and driving and also not having it on their hands, in their hands, sorry.
Okay, so we might say it's a real life situation. And even that, does it have an application in society? Did it result in anything, or could it have resulted in any changes in society? Did anything
Well,
happen?
it could. I mean, if people take into consideration as to statistics and stuff and how serious they are about it. But I
Okay,
mean, every adult that you tell something to, they already know and they don't want to take the initiative to try to change something until
okay.
something.
And there
I
was
think it
actually
did.
go ahead, someone
I
speaking.
think it did because of laws that are now in place because of it.
Yeah, we had laws that came into action because of it. So it's like a really clear example of applied research. It changed the laws in a lot of states. So laws were enacted. What other distraction did he look at? Like there are other things that distract us while driving. What's at least one that he mentioned? And let's call on Rufina. Did you pick up on that? Anybody? One distraction that he also tested with.
When you're driving impaired, I think he said it's like a 0.5 level.
Oh, yeah, he definitely compared it with driving impaired. Anyone pick up on the other one? What are other things that people distract themselves with while driving?
Besides talking on the phone,
Yeah, other things.
people put makeup on in the car.
Makeup, right, right. What other things do people do?
People smoke in the car.
Smoke? Anyone
Yeah,
else?
I've seen people like try to light a cigarette and then hit somebody.
Oh my gosh, lighting the cigarette even worse than just smoking. Lighting a cigarette. Anything else involving the auditory system, our ears, that people do while in the car?
Listening to music?
They listen to the radio. How about someone else? What else do they listen to while in the car?
Podcasts?
What did you say?
Well, didn't he compare it to like listening to the radio or
Yeah, listening to the radio. Exactly. That's the other one he mentioned. And we also listen to the person sitting next to us, right? So that's
oh,
another
so
thing
like
that could,
conversations in the car?
yeah, conversations in the car. Yeah, let's put that let's just add it. So those already are happenings. And so now what I want you to do, you don't have to go deep in, but see what you can do on this last question. You're thinking of a study that uses systematic empiricism to answer this research question. What is the impact of cell phone use on driving? Okay. And so think of a way that you could answer that question systematically in a generalizable way based on what you learned last week. So now I'm going to put you back into those two groups. Does anyone have a question on what to do? Okay, I'm going to call you back once again. I hope you get done in 4 minutes. If this is impossible, you're in the middle of it, drop me a text. Otherwise, I'll set my timer for 4 minutes again. All right, you guys, good luck. Set timer for 4 minutes. Set timer for 2.5 minutes. Okay, let's give Janie and Rufina a moment to reorient. So Janie, Rufina, just let me know when you're back in. Just speak up, please.
We're
Both of
here.
you.
We're here.
All right, beautiful. Okay, let's start with you then. How could we answer this question? Give me a quick little description of what you were thinking. And whoever wants to speak for the pair of you.
We were thinking the experimental, like a design study that how did I see it?
So how would we go
An
about doing
experiment.
that?
Well, we will be planning, making and analyzing the observations of it.
But what exactly would you be doing? Did you get that far? You have the right words, but I'd just like to know what exactly would you do? Maybe you didn't get that far. That's okay if you want to state that, but just answer that part of the question, please.
Maybe if we gave a cell phone to our passenger and had them kind of diddly around with it, and then asked them, like, did you see that sign? What was on that sign back there? Is there
Okay.
somebody, like, did you see that car pass by or something like that? And then see how much they're paying attention to the road
Okay.
versus what they're doing on that phone.
All right. You said give the cell phone to the passenger, but I think you must have meant the driver, right? Okay.
You could
And
give it to the driver, but that sounds dangerous.
okay, well, you're really right to say we would have to be protective of the safety of the driver, but I don't, so you'd give it to the passenger. That's an interesting because that wouldn't give us that much information about how it impacts driving, but I understand your safety concern and I really like your idea about how to measure it. Ask questions about the signs they saw on the road is a good example you gave. So that's a pretty cool idea for measuring it. How about Tylea and Malia? What did you come up with? Either one of you can.
We both had different like point of views on what we can say, but personally, what I would do is do an observational study, which is like, so what I was thinking is equip the vehicle with cameras and sensors to observe and record the driving behavior over time, mostly focusing on instances where the driver uses cell phones.
Okay, so you're going to go with their natural use of cell phones. Is that what I understand? And then you're going to have some sensors in the car to measure their driving behavior?
Yeah.
Okay, I like the idea of the sensors. That seems like really nice objective data. And you're going to put during natural times when they're using their phone.
Yeah. All
right, nice. I like the idea that you use the terminology too. And what did I have to apologize because I can't find you right now. So I couldn't see who was just speaking. Was that Tylea or Malia?
It was Tylea.
Okay, Malia. Tylea, what were you thinking on this one?
I was the one that was speaking. Tylea
okay,
was.
Malia, what were you thinking? I just can't find you at this moment for some reason. I'm looking for you. Malia, what were you thinking, please?
I mean, honestly, I didn't really think about it in that sense. It just said in a category of systematic empiricism, so basically observing.
So you liked the idea of an observational study also.
Yeah, I mean, if that's what we have to do. I mean, like I said, I really didn't think about it in that way based off of the way the question was like the way the question's asking it. Okay.
All right. Well, really good thinking on this, you guys. And I'm going to give you some really foundational on a concept we're going to be working with later before I move back into the slides. And so we will be talking about what exactly an experiment is. And let me circle this one word in our question, this word impact. Whenever you ask a word like that, you're suggesting that you want to know if A causes B. right? The impact of cell phone use, or does cell phone use, that's a variable, cause, driving distraction or something like that. Okay, so that word impact suggests causality, and that means that the only way we can answer the question is through an experiment. And you haven't really learned this yet, so this is just an overview of some content we'll be talking about a little later. And so what is an experiment? I'm just going to highlight with you the main components. It has to have two things. It has to have a manipulation or a treatment, and that just means you have to do something to some people, or expose some people to something, or ask one group to do something, and another group doesn't do that something. But you have to do something to your participants. So an observational study is not going to tell us causality. So if we just observed people who naturally use the cell phones, it might be that people who tend to use cell phones when driving just have a higher level of risk tolerance, and that their distracted driving behaviors are just a consequence of them being risk takers. So you see, we can't really determine that the cell phone is causing the distraction unless we do something to some participants that we don't do to the other. And I'll give you an example in this study in a moment. And then the second thing that has to happen is we have to control the conditions. We do that through random assignment. We'll talk about this later in the semester, and similar conditions. And so it might work like this. We're interested in cell phone use. So let's take a group of individuals who are drivers, and let's randomly assign half of them to talk on the phone. Maybe we're going to create a condition where we call them, or we ask them to call a good friend and talk. So they're assigned to talk on the phone, and the other individuals are assigned to not talk on the phone. Or listen to the radio. Or something like that, another type of distraction. And we use random assignment. That means that we just put their names in a hat to decide who goes into what group. And we create conditions that are very similar. So in the first study, if you read your book, you'll see that the very first way they did this was in a simulation lab, because they didn't want to get their people hurt. So they had just a driver simulation. And that means that the people were looking at a computer screen, and both groups were exposed to the same simulation lab, exactly the same conditions. And that's what we mean by controlling the situation. And then in the second set of studies, they had actual driving. And actual driving. But they controlled the condition to make sure that, like, the same time of day, the same route, and so forth. They couldn't control everything in that real life situation, so that's what they did. So the best way to work with this, it would be an experiment, and this would be the best way to do it. And if you read in your book, that's exactly what they did in this series of research. So that's kind of an overview of the kind of study you'll be likely proposing for this class. So any questions about that initial overview that I just offered you?
No questions.
Thanks for answering. Okay, let me ask you a question. These studies were likely conducted early on when cell phones were a novelty. Do you think that there might be the same kind of results today, or do you think it's possible that people have gotten better at talking on cell phones when driving? What do you guys think? Rufina, what do you think? Have people gotten better at talking on cell phones while driving now that or is it possible that people have gotten better at that now that cell phones are just ubiquitous? They're all over the place. What's your opinion about that, Rufina?
I think it got better
Maybe
because
we got better at it. Yeah.
yeah, because
So, yeah, go ahead.
because some certain cars they have those intercom like you talking to, but you're not actually holding your phone. You know,
Okay.
they
Maybe
have
it makes a difference that we don't have to hold our phones anymore. That's a good follow-up question to ask, right? Or maybe we've gotten better at it, right? Do you think that the results of his study are like truth that will always be true forever into infinity? What do you think? What's your intuition on that? Talia, what's your intuition on that? Will the results of that study be true always into infinity, do you think? Or is it possible that they might change for some reason or another?
I'm not very sure on that.
Yeah,
It's
we're not
kind
sure.
of, yeah, I'm not really sure on that.
Is there a
Maybe there
remote
is an answer.
pardon me?
Maybe someone has a point of view that they know. Because
Yeah,
honestly, I don't have I don't
it's a
know.
tough question, but it would be one that we would probably want to ask. And that brings us to this next little bit that we're going to talk about, which is the scientific process. Because in the scientific research process, we never know absolute truth. My pen isn't going to write nicely for us today because of my screen resolution. So I'm going to use the cursor. Can you guys see the cursor on the screen?
Yeah, we can.
Okay, I'll just use that. And so in order to do a research study, we're going to start here today. We're going to be finding out a research question, maybe through observation. So that's usually where it starts. Like he observed that maybe he saw drivers on the road using cell phones who were driving erratically, right? That might have been his observation. And so he turned it into a question, right? And then he went ahead and looked up, was there any research about this? And maybe since he studied cognitive neuroscience, he knew that people couldn't really multitask that well. So maybe that was the kind of research literature he looked at. But there probably wasn't much research on cell phones because they were very new. So he found research on sort of a related topic. And then he might have had to tweak his research question. Maybe once he looked at the literature, he realized, oh, my question isn't quite right, or it's already been answered. So maybe he went through this process a few times reading the research, and then he designed a study, the one I just described to you, in the lab, right? Randomly assigning people to groups. And then after he got the data, he analyzed it, draw some conclusions, and then, told people what those conclusions meant. And then maybe he published his results, went back to the literature, and asked another question. So maybe he find out, yeah, in the lab, people are distracted, but in real life, he wondered if it was true. So then he had to ask that question. And now you said at the end, he asked another question. What if they're just talking and it's just, a device so they're hands-free? Another question. And there might be more questions in the future that come up, right? So research never does have a final end result. It always ends up with something that we build on and we keep learning from. And I'm just going to skip through all of these slides real quick because I want to draw a parallel to you then. And I'm going to get these words wrong a little bit in my pronunciation. And if you want to correct me, I'll be grateful to you. But you can liken this to that process in the Navajo, that Navajo thinking process that we apply in all our classes. And we can say this first, asking the question might be the use of our intellect, our imagination, our critical thinking, and that's aligned with this Nishat case. Can someone please pronounce this word for me? I bet Rufina, I don't know if anyone knows this word.
Nisahakis.
Oh, that was beautiful. Say it one more time.
Nisahakis.
Nutsahakes. I'm sure I didn't say it quite right, but thank you. And then Nahata, I'm not sure if that's right. After that, we designed a study, right? And that's like preparing, being motivated, being self-reliant, figuring out a way to answer the question. And Rufina, can you please pronounce for us?
Which one? Nahat.
Nahat or whoever wants to. Nahat. Is that any
Nahat.
order? Okay. So maybe you can see that parallel. And then moving down here is implementing, right? We're gathering data, maybe collaborating with other scientists to get the data, collaborating with the participants, respecting the participants. Elna, like that.
Ina.
Inna. I always think
Yeah.
that's an L in there. And then finally, we have to reflect on it, right? We draw our conclusions, we ask more questions, we reflect on it. So I'd like you to see this parallel, the kind of thinking that's encouraged in Navajo ways throughout the lifespan, right? Through everything you do. This is the same as what researchers do. So we learn in our class how to design these studies, a certain method, but this is exactly what we're doing. So I wanted you to see that before we move on. And so at this juncture, I'm going to push through that one more time. I just want to point out that science is always evolving. We don't prove anything. We can get the result of a study, but that's it. That's one study. And maybe the study supports our hypothesis and maybe it doesn't. But it's not the ending, because there might always often be some sort of a nuance that someone else thinks of that makes a difference in our hypothesis. Or maybe someone replicates the study and they get a disconfirming result, a result that doesn't confirm the hypothesis. And so we always begin a scientific study with the assumption that there's nothing going on. And we'll talk about that as the null hypothesis, which is, if you had stats class, you already know what that's about. The hypothesis that's empty. So this guy, when he started his work, even though he thought cell phone use impacted driver distraction, he started out by assuming it didn't. And then he only said it did when he got evidence supporting that. So that's kind of a foundational thought. So now let's move into how we go about finding a research topic. Excuse me, I wrote question there. Let me just change that word to topic, because that's where we're starting today. And your topic is going to be something like what we identified for our researcher that we were looking at just a moment ago. So you're going to be thinking to yourself about a topic, and it's a really important process. The reason it's an important process is that you're going to stick with this topic through your whole class. So you want to make sure you're really interested in this topic at a really important level. And I have another slide that discusses that a little bit. On this slide, I'm going to give you some guidelines about a good topic for the kind of work we're doing in here. So first off, you want to focus in your topic, have it represent, if possible, a behavior. So by behavior, we mean something that you could observe or measure in some way. Now, in psychology, we often measure things that are constructs instead of behaviors, like maybe we measure self-esteem or depression, and we can't really observe those things objectively, but we could measure them through valid scales. So something like that would be okay. Behaviors are even easier to work with. So if you can find a behavior, and how do we get ideas? Well, one of the first ways is through informal observation, just like our researcher did, Dowd, I believe his name is. He observed that people who were using cell phones seemed to be driving erratically, right? And my example is, I can't remember if I mentioned it in here, but I had noticed when my boys were young that when they got at video games for a bit of time, and then I had to call them away, like for dinner or for something nice even that they were looking forward to, they'd be irritable for a little while. And so that kind of became my topic, video game play and irritability. And so I would state it like that, not as a question, just as a topic. I'm interested in video game play and irritability. All right. But maybe nothing comes to mind for you. I think it probably does. You can think about your workplace or things you've observed while you're a student here at Dene College, or maybe some difference that you observed between different types of people or differences you observed in different types of situation, or experiences, say, driving at night or driving during the day, or studying at night or studying during the day. So there's a whole bunch of things that you can observe about yourself or others. We probably have a human focus because most of our students are either in public health or in psychology. So that's one way. You just notice something in the world around you. A second way is a practical problem. You've noticed something that needs a solution. And let's say a practical problem that I've noticed as a faculty is that sometimes students don't do as well, in my experience, when they're in online courses. And maybe I'm curious, is it the way I'm teaching the online course, or is there something about taking courses online that makes students perform differently? So I think that's a practical problem. Maybe you've observed something in your community or in your family or clan or in just the world around you that you are seeing on social media. But a second idea for a topic can be a practical problem. And finally, a way that a lot of people, if they don't have an idea from one of these first two, is they read research studies. They look at previous research. And that's how I actually did my dissertation. It was like a combination of my observation and a research article I did. But I was sort of interested in like the impact of someone, the experience of someone who whose family didn't have a good background in higher ed at the graduate school level. And this was my own experience, and how that kind of led to sort of a sense of insecurity that could even impact performance. And so then when I started reading on this, I came across these articles on stereotype threat that showed such a nice way to test and measure it. And I was able to use that for my dissertation to adapt it to my curiosity about social comparison at the individual level. So that's another way to get an idea. So you probably already have your brain cranking by now, I hope. But one thing to think about when you're thinking of your topic is that, first off, make sure you're interested in it. You're the one who's going to need to work with it and read about it, so make sure it interests you. Secondly, maybe I said this is a requirement, but it does make a good topic if it's somehow related to your college major, because you might be able to start to build expertise in your area of study, which will be good for your eventual careers. And make sure it's not too specific or too broad. So your topics are just going to be phrases, like a few words. Just like I said, video game and irritability. So if a lot of people want to study addiction, and that's probably too broad because, addiction to what? Or are you interested in preventing addiction or treating addiction, or you interested in the causes? So maybe that one is a little too broad, maybe. And maybe if you brought it down too far, like you focused it on Pac-Man addiction. Pac-Man is an old, game that old video game from back when I was much younger. But that might be just too narrow, and it might be harder there might not be a point in narrowing it down that much, and it might be hard to find research. And then I have a couple more tips for you. So I want you to take care of your heart. So in this class, we're doing an exercise, sort of like when you work in the weight room to strengthen your leg muscles, but you're just doing it because you have a race coming up, right? And in this class, you're just learning how to conduct a study. And you might not want to get into something that's too close to you. Like, if you were abused, that might be too close to your heart for you to be objective in designing a study about it. So you want to maybe be a little cautious about that, something like that, if it's too close to you. I'm not saying you can't, but I'm just cautioning you about it. Remain with your expertise. So don't get too deeply into something that you don't have any background in. Like if you're interested in genetics, for example, the impact of genes on something, well, you're probably going to have a hard time designing a study unless you have a really good foundation in genetics. So I'd say stay away from something like that too. Make sure it's something that you at least have a foundational kind of sense of. So with that said, I'm going to be first giving you a few minutes of individual time. And I want you to identify 3 possible topics, not just 1, but 3. And these are just going to be a few words or phrases. Make sure they interest you and meet the criteria. You're going to write those 3 down. And for each one, just put down at least a note about why that idea might be interesting to you. And then if if I set the timer for 5 minutes and you still have time left, see if you have any factors, choose one of your topics, and think if there's any factors that you think might impact that or that it might impact. So think about maybe something that might be related to your topic or might have a causal effect on it. Don't worry if you don't get to that, but you have to get these 3 topics and tell why they interest you. After that, we're going to go with your partner, and each of you needs to share your idea, and the other partner must give you feedback. First off, they're going to help you figure out which idea might best be the one to study. At least they're going to give you their opinion on whether it's maybe too narrow or too broad, on whether it's something that could be measurable or that could be manipulated, like cell phone use while driving. Making sure it's of general interest, relevant in today's world. You can imagine it being not too outdated, and maybe not too close to the heart that you might experience emotional pain while you're studying it. Again, that's not required, but it's something to think about. Then after that, you're going to select that idea you're going to go with and adapt it based on feedback. I'll probably ask you what it is since we only have 4 here, and we won't do this last part here. You're going to be submitting your 3 ideas, why you're interested in each, and then the one that you chose and why you chose it, okay, and how you adapted it. So this is the task. And do you guys, let me ask each of you, Janie, do you already have 3 ideas kind of in your mind that you think this will be pretty quick, this individual part, or are you still giving it some thought?
I'm still giving it some thought.
Okay. Do you think like 5 minutes is enough to complete this task? Too much, too little? What do you think, Malia, Rufina, Janie? Does 5 minutes sound about right to get these 3 ideas down?
I already have like 2 ideas, but I'm not sure about the others. But to me, 5 minutes seems fine.
Let's set the timer for 5 minutes. And so for this, I'll just turn my mic and video off, let you do the writing. You can do the same. And then I'll call you back in 5 minutes and put you into groups for part 2 of this assignment. So go ahead and get started. I'll have my speaker on. If you have questions, you just let me know. And so 5 minutes, set timer for 5 minutes.